This podcast is brought to you by Ironsight. The logistical complexity of oil and gas field operations can make it difficult to stay on top of who is doing what, where, and when. That's where Ironsight comes in. And so Ironsight connects E&Ps, midstream companies, and service providers so they can collaborate and coordinate with the field services and internal resources more efficiently. Ironsight was designed to support everything from fluid hauling and hotshots to maintenance and trades, making it one of the most versatile field operations and logistics management tools on the market. How do they do it? Well, the secret sauce is, regardless of what type of service, every single job you need done is going to follow the same core workflow. Somebody requests a job, it gets scheduled, the job gets executed, what gets done is documented, and it's reviewed, approved, and the data and the documentation gets sent wherever it needs to go kind of from there. So Ironsight has spent years perfecting their fit-for-purpose function, making their core workflow configurable to any field activity so that you can lower operating costs, reduce your risk, and be more effective across your entire field operation. So whether you work for an E&P, midstream company, or service provider, if you're managing field operations and logistics, you're going to want to take a look at Ironsight. They were also the Energy Tech Night Midland winner a few years back. They've also been on the podcast in the past, good friends of ours. So go check them out. Visit ironsight.app/DW to learn if your company is eligible for a free 3-month trial. It's Ironsight, SIGHT.app/DW. Click the link in the description and let them know that we sent you.
What's going on, Digital Wildcatters? Welcome to another episode of Oil and Gas Startups Podcast. It's
a different episode. If you're looking for technology to scout for your company, this is not the episode for you. But if you want to dive into a great story of an entrepreneur who's been through a lot of stuff, this is the episode for you.
It's had some cool realizations and clarity and energy, and it's also just a controversial figure on Twitter every once in a while. But we got the one and only, the man, the myth, the legend, Brian Gitt. Brian, appreciate you being in town and coming and doing this. We were just laughing before we got on the mic. I was like, yeah, Brian called me a while back and just wanted to create content on Twitter and kind of like talk to him about just like what was happening in oil and gas tech and Twitter. Then he started posting. I was like, all of a sudden he's got more followers than I do. So you've blown up over there. So great work on that.
Oh, well, first of all, it's great to meet you guys in person. Obviously we've talked on the phone and engaging through social media, but it's always, I don't know, I really have come to appreciate all of these in-person interactions. You just can't replace it with Zoom or communicating on all these social channels. So
with our podcast, we were very strict. I mean, we've been doing this podcast for 4.5 years now, and we're not doing it remote. Even during COVID, we did one remote episode. We're like, yeah, fuck that. We're not doing a remote episode again.
You can't replicate us just sitting in this room. Us bullshitting before we, started the mic just for 30 minutes.
Getting to talk. I mean,
you can't replicate that.
Are you still are you in San Francisco?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've been living in the Bay Area, 25 years. I've lived all parts of the Bay and North Bay, East Bay, making a circle around it. But I live in San Francisco.
Cool. So give me your backstory, being in San Francisco. It's been a long time since we talked on the phone. I think you came from a tech background and been part of building companies, operating companies. So just kind of tell us about that real quick.
Sure. Well, I grew up in St. Louis in the Midwest, so it took me a while to get out to California. I'm not a native Californian. Lived in actually Austin, Texas for a year, many years ago.
Before it was cool, huh?
Yeah, way before it was cool. And I lived in Arizona, so I slowly migrated west. And one of the reasons I migrated west was at that point in time, this was, like 25 years ago or something, is just all the promise and hope of kind of Silicon Valley and all the cool stuff, the technology that's happening there, but also a lot of the environmental ethos out there. At that point, I was a real hardcore environmentalist when I was young. I mean, I was the kind of, when I was a teenager, I used to lead all these outdoor adventure trips. We'd go for 40 days in Alaska,
That's awesome.
Taking teenagers, doing glacier travel, sea kayaking, ice climbing, all this kind of stuff. And I mean, quite honestly, I just fell in love with the outdoors. I just love being outside, really connected with it. I love sharing and teaching kids about that experience because you saw this transformation. So this quick little story, most of the kids we took were wealthy, right? How else are they going to afford to send their kid for 6 weeks to Alaska or something like that?
Right. Yeah.
But so they were mostly from the coast, mostly pretty sheltered. I just remember this girl, she's 15 years old. She's from Manhattan, never cooked a meal, never washed her own clothes, never had to do much for herself, right? She lived a pretty privileged life. And here she was in remote Alaska. We would hike 10 days into the wilderness 10 days from a road.
Yeah.
So if anything would happen, you're out there.
Yeah, you're kind of screwed.
And I was 21 years old. My trip leader, she was 22, and that's it. We had no backup.
Wow.
And our job was not to caretake these kids and babysit them. Our job was to teach them how to be self-sufficient, how to read a map, how to cook, how to set their tent up, how to survive in the wilderness. And watching the transformation of this girl that was 15 years old, that had never done anything, taken any responsibility really for herself, to feeling, seeing her go through that whole cycle of being frustrated and in tears and all these things in the beginning, and then seeing her at the end of that process feeling confident in a way that she had never felt and having this connection to the environment and the outdoors. It was such a cool experience to watch that transformation in people. So that's what hooked me. I got hooked. And because I was spending all this time in the outdoors, I was really kind of bleeding environmental ethos, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I wanted to protect these areas because number one, I selfishly wanted to experience them, but also I wanted everyone else to experience them. And that kind of led me down a whole path in my career. So this was, that started in my late teens when I started doing all this outdoor backpacking, rock climbing, all this stuff. And then eventually was work myself way to basically lead the trips. So that led me to energy, into buildings, because I was very practical about it. I didn't want to be one of these people that says, oh, save the rainforest or this or that. It's like very remote, very hard to relate to for most people. Like, what is that? How does that really affect my life? But energy in buildings, that's something that we deal with every day. I mean, we're working in buildings, we're raising our kids and families in buildings, and we relate with energy and all these materials. So that just seemed like a very practical way to make a dent and educate people, et cetera. So that's kind of what sucked me into the energy space and kind of what I would characterize as green building, green construction, and set me on my path. So that's how I got into all this, is coming from a kind of an odd angle, especially where I am today and how most people view my position.
Yeah. So let's we got to bridge over to how people view your position. We got to work up to that a bit. You go from spending a ton of time in the outdoors, really gaining this respect for nature, moving into green buildings. And, when you and I had talked on the phone, you told me, you're like, hey, I was one of these guys that, an environmentalist. I believe oil and gas was bad, things of this nature. What was the catalyst for you having a shift in the way that you thought about energy? Something happened.
Yeah. Many things happened. So I worked for over 20 years within the energy sector, but all on technologies that would be characterized as green technologies, like energy efficiency, whether it's lighting, heating, air conditioning kind of technologies. We would, for a time, I was a CEO of a consulting firm that we would implement programs for utilities to make homes more energy efficient. And this is one of the first times I've really started to see cracks in my belief system, because I thought my belief was, hey, if we had enough money, if we had all the government support and utility support and all the contractors on board, we could do this. We could make all these buildings more energy efficient. We could put solar on all these homes, and we could achieve the environmental goals that we had set out to. And then 2008 happened with the financial crash, and the federal government under the Obama administration decided to pump a massive amount of money into the energy sector to get people back to work, to create jobs. And the money started to flow in early mid 2009 and then ran for several years. So my company was really well positioned for that. And we ended up winning a $60 million contract to implement a really large scale program in California.
Nice.
And I was ecstatic, right? I mean, here we are.
$60 million contract.
Our company, I was brought in to the company, the founder, it was a 30-year-old company. It was a small boutique consulting firm. They had specialized in energy technologies, did a lot of work for the Electric Power Research Institute and utilities, but very niche things. And we were about 15 people, pretty small. And then overnight, we win these big contracts. And we scaled up to 50 people within a very short period of time, like 6 months. And then we had this massive, because we were the general, basically contractor, program manager for this. So we had dozens of large subcontractors and lots of money flowing through. And it just changed overnight. And we opened a new office in LA. And this was a statewide program in California. And this really taught me, though, this was a kind of direct answer to your question, which is how did I change my mind? Well, here it was, we had everything. We had all these resources, all the support you could ever imagine from all the key stakeholders. And the program was a failure in my mind, because we had set out, California around that time period had set these really ambitious targets. And government agencies love to do this. They love to set aspirational targets, whether it's around CO2 reduction, around a number of homes that are energy efficient and other homes that get solar installed on it. They love to set these aspirational goals. At the time, the California Public Utilities Commission and all the state agencies set this aspirational goal that 100% of the homes would become 40% more energy efficient by 2020. This was in 2008 timeframe, 2008, 2009, when they set these goals. And I was thinking, 40% more efficient by 2020? All of them? You mean all the whole housing stock? I mean, there's...
And for context, so you guys were consulting on that. Like, what was it? What do you think is a realistic efficiency kind of goal there?
Yeah, exactly. So even the deep home performance contractors that would go into a house and upgrade and redo the air conditioning system and the heating system, and they'd seal all the ducts and they'd put in insulation, and oftentimes they'd put in new windows and, just all the best practices around energy efficiency. Most of the time they were getting 20 to 30% savings. And those projects were costing, $20,000. It's not inexpensive to put in all those major HVAC systems and do all this kind of work. And they do all the performance testing, blower door test, air duct testing, all this for leakage, all this stuff. It's a huge investment up front, and none of it really, they're all good things to do, right? It's you want to have a home that's comfortable, that you don't hear sound pollution from the street, don't have off-gassing from bad products. Those are all good things, and I support it all. However, it doesn't make financial sense. You wouldn't do it for a return on investment because, first of all, many of these homes would never pay back ever. And even if they did, you're talking about decades, not like 5-year payback.
There's a funny story along those lines. So Chuck Yates, who's on our team, a longtime private equity guy, ran Kane Anderson's energy practice, and his dad got solar panels on his house here in Houston. And Chuck's like, "Why did you get solar panels? Like, your payback on that, you're never going to get payback. It's like 20 years. And then Winter Storm Uri hits and Chuck lost power out of his house and his dad had power through his solar panels. So Chuck's like, "Oh yeah, okay, I get it. Like, pay a premium to have, to have that ability to have a, distributed energy system, but it may not make sense financially. But, if you have the means to pay a premium, it can make sense from, just security and having access to energy." So, I think that's important to bifurcate of like what makes sense economically and what just makes sense if you do have discretionary money to spend on those things.
Yeah. So this was one of the first cracks in my belief system, because I held all these beliefs that we could do this. And what it showed me when we had all of those resources and engagement from stakeholders is we upgraded a few thousand homes or something like that. I'm trying to remember the exact number, but it was certainly less than, 10,000 homes, let's say. Yeah. The state of California has like 14 million housing units. And they had set these ambitious goals at the state level to achieve almost basically 100% market penetration with 40% reduction. And I was just sharing, the level of investment you would need to spend to get to 40%, you're talking $40,000 to $50,000, and many homes could never get there just because of their existing construction or kind of the way they're
Was it
designed.
Saying all those 14 million homes, or was it just saying new homes moving forward?
No. All existing homes. They had separate goals for new construction.
How do you come up with a goal that is so off base? Like, did they just have the wrong people in their ears saying that this is even possible in the first place?
I feel like we can ask that about a lot of
that's true about
energy
everything.
Policy.
but with this case in particular, do you know how they even got to this number?
It all comes back to greenhouse gas emissions, and climate change is kind of the underlying motivational force behind this that's driving a lot of this. And they just did this analysis on each sector. They look at transportation, they look at buildings, they look at industry, And then they start segmenting that out and they start to tally this all up and say, well, what do we need to do to hit these aspirational greenhouse gas reduction goals? That's really what was driving this. And so that, well, if we're going to hit the goal, we're going to have to do this kind of level of effort and level of reduction, regardless of how that's realistic or practical, because it's clearly not, but that's not really what their job is. And there's no accountability in these things. You set these goals and targets all the time. Oftentimes, if the people are around, they're never held accountable. And oftentimes they're not even around anymore, especially the elected officials that are spearheading and cheerleading these things. They're not even in that role anymore. And so there's no real accountability for these types of, so when you just dissect the incentives. It's like Charlie Munger says, like, look at the incentives and you'll always find the rationale behind it. That's what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Talking about California's energy policy and especially some of the things that they're doing nowadays is a whole nother episode in of itself, because you've oftentimes asked is like, how this isn't realistic from, several different angles, whether it's economics, whether it's physics, whether it's just, I think what you talked about was like, hey, we had everything that we needed. We had all the buy-in, all the support from all the key stakeholders. And this is something that I think people that are outside the energy industry, they always say, well, it's oil and gas that's, keeping renewables from wind and solar. I'm like, what are you talking about? I was like, there's more money's flown into renewables than that you can possibly keep up with. All the money and the resources are there, but what happens is that you run into physics and economics and reality, right? And so there's this whole just notion that it's oil and gas that's stifling innovation and keeping new energy sources from coming. But you saw this in a firsthand experience of like, hey, you can have support from all the key stakeholders, you can have all the money that you need, and there's still challenges to being able to go and execute on those things. And so that's really cool first world.
Yeah, I was inside the belly of the beast. California, and they're not stopping. They take these bad ideas and then they run all the way over the cliff with them. Right now they're doing this with zero emission vehicles. So they've banned any kind of internal combustion sales of new internal combustion.
And they're going after semis too.
Yes.
Which is, and gas generators, which is just insane to me. Look, I'm a fan of electric vehicles. I actually think that they are a better product than internal combustion engines in certain situations. I don't want to be driving across Texas to Midland in an EV, but driving from the house to the office, like I'll do that all day. And
I think Tesla, from a mechanical standpoint, it's definitely a better consumer product. It's even me being a car guy, because now you know we're about the oil changes. There's still things that have to get replaced, right?
All the things that break and that you have to maintain on an ice. Yeah. And so, but also realizing that, hey, the goals that we have set for EVs by 2030, 2040, all these arbitrary numbers that don't, like, they're all made up, right? It's like, you can't get to levels of 100% penetration, especially in these short of time frames. And that goes both for EVs and renewables. And, here at Digital Wildcatters, we're pro energy. We think that we need every energy source that we can get, especially as we continue to scale technology and society continues to thrive, but also really thinking about that through a pragmatic lens and saying like, hey, we can't scale up nameplate capacity of wind power generation in Texas too quickly, or else you run into situations like Uri and other brownout, blackout situations, because if we haven't invested the CapEx that needs to go into backup power generation, things of that nature. And so, it's unfortunate to see like what happens in California. And I think that you hit the nail on the head, that there's no accountability. So why does you can just put anything that you want out there, and then people in society that may not be as educated on the topic, like, oh, hey, we need to have electric vehicles by 2030. So that's what we're doing. And they don't think about negative second order effects of that policy.
Yeah. Last September in California, you're getting alerts on your phone telling you not to charge your electric vehicle because the state grid is in jeopardy of going into a power blackout situation. And we have a teeny fraction of the vehicles currently that are electric. So I'm pro technology. I'm agnostic on technology. Whatever is going to be useful, convenient, add value to people's lives, great. I don't really care what that is, but let the market decide, let consumers decide. Don't try to cram it down on people from the top in arbitrary ways. And ultimately, you are going to really, number one, you're going to kill people because energy is life or death. I mean,
Yes.
You guys saw this in Texas. When you have power blackouts, people die. You had at least a couple hundred people or more die. So it's serious.
I mean, you look at this at a bigger scale. I mean, the reason that there's a full-on war in Ukraine comes down to energy policy. When you have a petrol warlord in Putin that's not afraid of Europe because he has leverage over nat gas supply, things of that nature. I mean, tons of innocent people die. They die when you have fertilizer shortages like we had because nat gas is the feedstock for it. And so now you have famine and food shortages. I mean, there's everything is connected together and it all comes back to energy. Energy's upstream of everything, right? So yeah, I mean, this is a serious matter that we're talking about. When we have bad energy policy, people die as a result of that.
And you're crushing small businesses and hurting poor people. I mean, that's who's really suffering the worst brunt of this. I was just speaking with a trade association in California the other day. Their members, basically it's California Fuels and Convenience Association. So it's all the gas station, convenience store owners and fuel distributors and folks. And they're, these kind of policies are threatening their livelihoods, right? These are family-owned businesses. These aren't big corporations. People think that gas station owners are owned by, all the big super majors. It's not true. I mean, very small percentage of them. Most of them are small, family-owned, mostly minority-owned businesses, just trying to make a living. And all the small businesses that are distributing fuel, everything else. And these kind of arbitrary laws and rules are really threatening their business and their livelihood. So there's many examples of this. It's not even people just in the oil and gas industry that suffer the brunt of this because everyone has to pay more for energy. I mean, California's energy costs have been skyrocketing 7 times faster than the rest of the country. Yeah. Now they're paying 80% more in many parts of the state on average. And this hurts the poor people the most, right? Yeah. And as well as small businesses. It's not good for anyone.
Yeah, I have a friend. She runs a energy company here in Houston, and it might be a nonprofit. I can't remember if it is or not, but it's actually a utility electricity provider. And she talks about energy poverty, and she's like, when we talk about energy poverty, we always picture, Africa or places like that, parts of Asia. She's like, it's right here in Houston. She's like, you go to different parts of Houston, and you have a single mother with 4 kids that gasoline prices are high and she can't put money in her car, in her gas tank to go to work. And so that's like what all of her work is. This isn't some foreign concept of like, oh, this only happens over in poor parts of the world. Like happens to, people here in the United States and in our cities.
Yeah. One thing I'll push back a little bit on something you said earlier, because it's always fun to have some disagreement too.
You're sitting across the table from Frax Lab, dude. Hell yeah.
You were saying kind of the all above the approach, like we need more. I agree 100%. We need more energy. That's the number one goal is we need more energy. The world is, we know it's going to consume 50% more energy than it is today. Most of that growth is going to happen in the developing world. But even here, we're going to need a lot more energy for all robotics, machine learning, all the digitalization of everything. We're going to use a lot more. I don't think necessarily that all of the above approach is the right thing, because there's always opportunity cost and there's a limited amount of time and resources that we have. And if you spread everything out across a bunch of different things that might not be really effective in the way that they're intended, you're not actually achieving the goal. And so I'm not anti-solar. I'm not anti-wind. I like I said, I'm agnostic on technologies, and they have their place. And I think it's an interesting niche technology. However, pumping trillions of dollars into building infrastructure that is based on those technologies is a recipe for disaster. I think, number one, in terms of skyrocketing energy bills. Number two, massive reliability issues and resilience issues of the grid. And I think I look through the lens of opportunity cost, because if we're going to put all these resources there, we're basically saying no to other technologies. And in Texas is a great example. They are parasitic on thermal power plants, right? All of the incentives that have been pumped into wind incentives mostly, but solar too, in the state of Texas are acting as a parasite on the economics of running a natural gas plant, a nuclear plant, and these other technologies. And so it's not like these things just exist in a vacuum. They interface and relate. And when these wind farms are basically monetizing the subsidy or the tax credit, so that wealthy people can pay less taxes, but yet they're undermining the reliability of the electrical grid, because now you can't run your natural gas plant or your nuclear plant at an optimum level to achieve a level of performance and efficiency to make money. So no one's building those anymore. So those are shutting down, or you can't build them. And all the incentives are over here, people making money on it because they're, all the tax credits. So I don't believe in all of the above approach.
I was excited we're going to have some disagreement, but I agree with all that. So, one thing that, a couple things. One is, energy is actually very much geographically dependent, right? And so West Texas, you don't have any water. So guess what? There's no hydropower there. But what there is a lot is oil, gas, wind, solar. You go up to the Pacific Northwest, you have hydropower up there. And so you have some geographical limitations and pros and cons when it comes to energy. The second, I love the point that you brought up, because this is actually something I talk a lot about. So in oil and gas, you had this thing called half cycle economics. And
here we go. Here's the rabbit hole.
Yeah. And when I learned about what this actually meant, it blew my mind, because you'd hear like, oh, this well has a 40% IRR in half cycle economics. Half cycle economics meant, hey, we're going to back out all of our land costs, all of our G&A, and you're only looking at the marginal cost of that well bore. And I was like, how can you have 40% IRRs on these wells, but all these oil and gas companies are losing money? Well, yeah, because you'd base it off of half cycle economics. Something similar is happening right now with wind and solar, especially in Texas, where you subsidize and you build all of this wind power generation. And you got to ask yourself, why is there even such thing as stranded wind and solar assets? That shouldn't even be a thing. Everyone complains about transmission and interconnections. There shouldn't even be such, why would you build a wind asset if you don't have connection to it? Well, it's because it's subsidized. You still make money for actually building out the asset. And there's always this talk about wind and solar are much cheaper than oil and gas. And I'm like, if you're looking at it on that asset base, yes, that can be true, but these things don't happen in a vacuum. I love how you kind of frame that, because now what happens is your nat gas, your nuclear plants, they don't have the CapEx investment that they need. And you build up all this nameplate capacity in wind generation, and it's never operating at nameplate. It's 30, 40% of that. And so you rely on, these nat gas plants who are now being underinvested in, and it becomes this problem to where all of a sudden you have grid issues and power generation issues in Texas, where that was never a thing growing up as a kid. We always had power. Now every month we're having brownout, blackout issues. And so I think that that's something really important, is when you look at renewables, we need to look at the cost from end to end. What do we need in battery storage? What do we need in backup generation? You can't just look at the asset by itself in a vacuum. You have to think about, and I brought that up with some of my friends that are in renewables. They're like, well, yeah, but the people that build the batteries are different than the people that build the wind assets. My thing is, me as a taxpayer in Texas, I don't give a shit about the business model. I give a shit about having cheap and reliable and secure energy, and a fragmented business model is actually proving that you lose reliability and power generation. So there's my soapbox.
I think that going back to what you said earlier about the grid, I saw this quote a while back. I don't know if it's true. Maybe you have an updated kind of number on this, but talking about EV projections, and in particular about what the goals would be and how much power we need to bring online to even support the charging, the infrastructure that we would need to build, and a complete overhaul of our entire grid here in the United States. And the quote I saw was $14 trillion, and would also be the largest infrastructure renewal or plan ever. And it's like the equivalent of building the Death Star. It's so astronomical that nobody really has stopped and think about it. Is this even possible? We've never done this before. Never done anything remotely close to the magnitude of this. Yet this is something that we're tying to a plan that everybody's kind of rallying behind. right? I feel like there needs to be like a whole series on like shit that doesn't make sense. Like when you look at the actual data of like how
like an entire content track for us.
Like how is this even, like how is this even possible? And also, and then you see the numbers on like how much has been invested in things like wind and solar, and then the percentage of like the reduction of like greenhouse gases in comparison to, let's just say, oil and gas or nuclear or something else. And it's like trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars for like offsetting like 1%.
This is where I think there's a real disconnect between the ideology and reality. Because if CO2 reduction goal, which is a noble goal, right? If we can reduce emissions, then we should. But if that was truly the goal, then why would you vilify natural gas when natural gas represents the vast majority of the savings as we've transitioned from coal to natural gas in the United States from 2005
61%
to 2020, 61% of the 1 billion metric tons of CO2 reduction, which is the equivalent, by the way, of every country in Europe combined. So the United States just transitioning from coal to gas over the last 15 plus years is the equivalent of all the stuff they've been doing in Europe during that time.
It's funny. I gave a lunch and learn to this law firm, and some of them were over in the UK, and I know what I was going to talk about. So I just talked about that. And this attorney, he's like, Colin, I'm listening to you talk. He's like, I'm sitting here fact checking you. And he's like, in the UK, we like to tout that we've driven down our CO2 emissions. He's like, but as I'm listening to you talk, that's because we've gone from coal to natural gas. And with the energy crunch that we're in, it seems that it's going to be much harder to go from natural gas to renewables. And so you start putting that logic, like you frame it up like that, and smart people that think objectively and pragmatically, they pick up on that. And, also kind of one of, we'll get into you being called a climate denier and everything on Twitter here in a little bit, because you made comments on like, hey, we should reduce CO2. I put out a thing on Twitter the other day. I was like, who gets to determine the optimal amount of atmospheric gases and CO2 concentration? Because, I hate the whole decarbonization thing, because that's anti-life to me. Like CO2 is the basis of all life. So yes, hey, if too high of a concentration threatens life on the planet, we should work to mitigate that. But also it's just idea of like, hey, we have to mitigate every molecule and methane and oil and gas. It's just like, it's kind of crazy to me. But, I want to kind of like wrap into some of the name calling that you get called on Twitter, because when I sit here and listen to you talk, I'm like, hey, grew up loving nature, grew up building technology that was around energy efficiency in the name of saving the planet. You've worked in utilities, you've done all this stuff. And then, you make this you make like a Twitter thread that I think is very pragmatic and reasonable. And all of a sudden you have people in the comments calling you a climate denier and things of this nature. One, what would you say to those people if they were listening to this show? And then two, like, does that bother you? Like getting hate on Twitter.
This podcast is brought to you by EnergyX. Are you tired of paying huge rates to the big cloud providers? Are you worried about being booted off a cloud platform if your company doesn't meet their ever-shifting standards? Ready to step up your data security and disaster recovery game? Well, ladies and gentlemen, your new cloud is ready. Introducing xCloud, the scalable, resilient computing cloud that is also actually affordable. It's high-performance compute for half the cost. HPC for HTC. xCloud from Red Team is opening a beta program for new cloud computing customers, and that means you, my friend. The xCloud is powered by the XMDC immersion-cooled modular data center from EnergyX. I've seen this data center in operation, and it is a total game changer. So if you want more information about the beta launch, go to the URL in the description. Type in promo code BETA, BETA, for 50% off of your first instance. And so the URL is going to be digitalwildcatters.com/EnergyX.
It's funny because you'll tag me and stuff, and so like my mentions are blowing up. I'm like, so I just see everyone hating on Brian.
I'm gonna go look at your tweets while you're talking.
Yeah. So the whole reason I got into this, again, back to my origin story, was because I feel passionately about the environment, and that hasn't changed at all.
Yeah.
I just think we're going about it the wrong way. If we're going to be smart and practical about solutions, we need to be coming up with solutions that actually work. Mm-hmm. And to me, the whole direction we're going is the wrong direction, right? If we got to zoom out and think, what are we trying to achieve? What is the goal? To me, most of us would agree on two main goals. we want to protect and improve human welfare, basically more humans to flourish.
Yeah.
Second goal is we want to protect and improve the quality of our environment. No one wants to breathe dirty air or drink polluted water. And that's the reality for, the majority of humans on the face of the planet today. The biggest problem in the world is not climate change. The biggest problem in the world today is energy poverty. We have almost 4 billion human beings living in some level of energy poverty. About 700 million of them have zero access to electricity and cook with dung and wood and breathe in wood smoke every day, the equivalent of 2 packs of cigarettes.
Yeah,
and
the biggest problem that the world's facing is an energy crisis.
Yeah, we need more energy, not less.
Yes.
And so that's the biggest problem. I mean, if you want to maximize human flourishing and, by the way, reduce environmental impact, because the lifestyle of cutting down trees and cutting down forests and basically eliminating endangered species in many parts of the world because people need wood to cook and wood to keep warm at night is incredibly environmentally damaging and very emitting in terms of CO2 and air pollution.
Cutting down forests to burn for energy use is, it's a compound effect because, okay, now you just took away this CO2, this carbon sink, you took away habitat for animals, and you're burning it. It's a carbon sink. So all that CO2 is going back into the atmosphere. And I don't think that your average person realizes look, that's how humans evolved. We discovered fire. We were able to cut down wood and use it for fuel. And nothing's worse than that. And so any energy source that is displacing the burning of forests and wood is better.
We like to vilify coal oftentimes, but coal saved the forests, and then so we have to acknowledge all of the massive benefit that coal has brought.
Yeah.
It's an amazing resource. And still, many parts of the world should continue to produce coal because they can't yet afford nuclear power, natural gas, or cleaner burning fuels.
I've actually funny story. One, I'm continuously learning about energy every day. And I was actually in Pittsburgh. I was actually with Toby and stayed out too late drinking. So I get on this plane hungover, which is like out of character for me because I don't drink much. And so it just hit me that much. I'm like, get on this plane. I'm not going to talk to anyone. I end up sitting next to like a congressman for West Virginia. And this guy and I spent 4 hours, however long that plane ride is, talking about energy policy. And he's like, they're going to do the same thing to natural gas. He's like, you're using natural gas as an argument over coal. He's like, and guess what? Then they're coming for natural gas. He's like, we've done things that they asked in coal. He's like, we still believe in coal. And that actually like opened up my eyes. It's like, I don't go down the path of talking about natural gas displacing coal. I think that there's a spectrum of coal production in the United States, and we should focus on, sourcing coal from, or in the world, sorry. We should focus on sourcing coal from countries that have clean standards. But yeah, like when I look at it, I'm like, we need energy from every source that we can get. And over time, you start high grading to better solutions, just like coal did for timber and forest, right? So I think that's an important thing to think
there's
about.
an underlying false assumption. I call it the energy damage assumption, which I think most people believe, or many people believe, which is the amount of energy consumed is proportional to the amount of environmental impact in a negative way, environmental harm. So people believe, well, if we consume more energy, we're going to destroy the environment.
Yes.
And that energy damage assumption is 180 degrees wrong.
Yes.
It's exactly the opposite. The more energy we consume, the more we shrink our environmental footprint, the less air pollution, the less intrusion into a wildlife habitat, the cleaner the water, because we know, if people want data, go look at every wealthy country around the world. Their quality of water, the quality of air, the overall protection of natural areas is significantly better than areas that have less energy and are more polluted, right? In developing world, they're energy poor. That's we call it energy poverty. They don't have enough energy.
And that's why we're energy maximalist, because there's this, I see this a lot in like the Bitcoin mining space with all the, criticism that it gets, but there's this idea that there's energy scarcity and that we should reduce our energy consumption. And I'm the complete opposite. I'm like, hey, we should produce and consume as much energy as possible. We shouldn't have this scarcity mindset, because the more energy that we consume, the more, humans just flourish and society grows. And, you might have heard me say this before, but everyone talks about an energy transition. And I've always been like, there's not a transition, it's an addition. Like, energy demand has the potential to grow infinitely over time. You can look at government agencies' predictions and like, hey, energy demand will peak in 2040, 2050. But does that really take into consideration that we become a multi-planet species and we start traveling between Mars? Space travel is picking up. Guess what? You need a lot of energy to travel around space. And so energy demand actually has the potential to keep increasing infinitely. So your y-axis keeps going up. Yeah, cool. We're adding wind, solar, renewables, but it's not enough to keep up with the energy demand. And I think that energy consumption is a good thing. And I think that you said it's like 180 degrees from how other people think about it.
Yeah, the data is clear on this. We've spent trillions of dollars over the last 2 decades investing in mostly wind and solar, but renewables in general. And we haven't decreased our fossil fuel consumption hardly at all. We've gone from 87% of the world being powered by coal, oil, and gas to 83% after trillions of dollars in 20 years. It on a graph, it barely even shows up, right? Because we're going to keep consuming more energy, and fine, add more of these technologies to the mix, but we're not in an energy transition in any time in the near future. Of course, if you zoom out far enough, of course, we're constantly evolving and adapting, and we'll be migrating more and more to cleaner burning, more energy dense fuels. And that's why I'm a huge fan of natural gas and nuclear power, because those are two of the cleanest options that have the highest power density or energy density within them.
I think nat gas and nuclear is such a just deadly 1-2 punch when it comes to, one, it's abundant. There's a ton of natural gas around the world. Nuclear's, we talked about energy being geographically dependent. Nuclear is the one that like really kind of breaks that mold. And so I'm a huge fan of nuclear. The one thing, I've had this comment on kind of the back of my mind going through this conversation, because your story of growing up in nature and developing a love for nature, I don't think that there is a per capita or per person basis that is greater than the oil and gas industry of outdoorsmen. Like, there is a huge overlap of rednecks in the oil field and outdoorsmen that just fishing, have a camping, deep appreciation for nature. And so I've always found this paradox to be.
Who do you think's more outdoorsy in that regard? Oil and gas people or renewable people?
Oh, oil and gas, 100%. I'd even put like against tech people, like on a per person basis. Almost everyone I know in the oil field is an outdoorsman. And I've always found that to be interesting, because you hear like the media on the other side and like, oh, the oil and gas industry is killing the planet and, they hate nature, and it couldn't be further from the truth based on the people that are here. I was kind of interested in like your preconceived notions of the oil and gas industry. I have a feeling you probably didn't interface with oil and gas folks much when you're working in energy efficiency, but now you are, you're here talking with us. You said you talked to Chris Wright the other day. And have you had a shift in the way that you think about the oil and gas industry and the people that work in it kind of along this journey?
A shift would be a severe understatement. I used to believe very strongly that the oil and gas industry was kind of the evil empire, plundering earth, creating all this pollution, greedy capitalists just extracting as much as they can without any concern for the environment. And it's hard to emphasize how I've shifted to the opposite of that. Now, after really spending years understanding the energy system and researching these issues, and quite frankly, I was just ignorant. And this is why I try not to attack people or get into kind of, I like to battle in the realm of ideas, but not really with people, because I was one of those people that was clueless and ignorant about these topics because I hadn't spent enough time researching it. And I was in my little ideological bubble, and hadn't popped. Well, the bubble popped. and I realized I feel that the fossil fuels has improved the quality of human life and improved the quality of our environment more than anything else in human history. And the data is absolutely clear on this in terms of every possible conceivable social metric and environmental metric you could imagine.
Yeah.
It has vastly improved their quality of life.
Yeah.
I've gone from one extreme to the other. Now I'm an oil and gas maximalist.
Now you're getting called climate denier and you're a paid shill for oil and gas, and
which is ironic because I work in the nuclear industry. So it's like, how does that work? So wait, I'm a paid shill for fossil fuels, but I actually sell nuclear power.
Don't worry, I get it. I've got called all the names too, and I like to think that I'm pretty pragmatic about the way I think about things too. But one, I want to tell you that I appreciate the self-awareness that you've had and like getting here. And you're like, I was one of those people. One thing that I like to tell people in oil and gas is, there's a lot of ignorance out there, and usually it's because of a lack of exposure to ideas. And, I always think about like a kid up in New York City. Grows up, the only exposure he has is what he sees from mainstream media or the Biden administration and the White House. They don't have any exposure to the energy industry and how electricity that comes out of their wall, they think they just plug in and electricity comes out. They don't know how it's actually produced and how energy works. And you can't blame them. You can't be mad at them for that because they've never had a medium to learn. And this is a huge mission for us at Digital Wildcatters, is to create content where the world can learn and raise energy IQ. Because just like I was talking about with that attorney, you just lay it out and you talk about it, and people can they can connect the dots, and they can kind of see how this works. And so one, I don't blame anyone for being ignorant. What I do blame people for is, if you're not open-minded to hearing discussions and being objective in your thinking. I think that's when it gets in the territory, I'll dunk on you on the internet. Me and Brian are a little bit different. I'll take opportunities to dunk on people on the internet, but
it's weird how people have kind of almost made this entire topic borderline kind of religious, in a way, to where they become hyper fanatical. And one of the things that I've always remember that my great uncle, I think he's one of the smartest people I've ever known, said is you can never change somebody who's a radical's mind, right? You can never have a logical conversation with somebody. So it's people have made this almost climate religion, and they don't want to educate themselves on things because then it would go against everything that they believe. And so they find comfort in kind of being ignorant, and they think maybe that's the noble kind of thing to do. And I think that's the overwhelming majority of the people that you would have as haters.
It's to what we were talking about before we went on air here, which was everyone in their own way is seeking a sense of purpose, sense of meaning in their life. And many people get that by feeling they're contributing to something bigger than themselves. I think inherently human beings want to do that. That could mean on the most simple level, taking care of your kid or taking care of a parent. It could mean through your work. But for many people, that's latching on to a cause that they can believe in, that they feel like they're contributing to making the world better. And it is, I think, inherent in humans that we just want that. Most people want that. And what's happened is, I think you mentioned the religiosity aspect of this, which I think is spot on, because we know, you look at all the statistics, especially in the US and in Western countries, religion is kind of backsliding in a lot of ways. And that foundation of beliefs and that system of values that enables people to engage in the world and feel like they're contributing in a meaningful way and giving back was stripped away for a whole generation of people. I was one of them. So I know how that feels. I was searching for meaning and purpose. And that's why I gravitated towards environmentalism, is because it gave me a sense of purpose and a sense of contributing to something bigger than myself. And it became part of my identity. And that's what I think you're alluding to here is, it's one thing to debate issues or criticize topic, but you're threatening someone's identity. And it's not so easy to shed your identity. It was pretty painful process for me.
Yeah.
And, not everyone's up for it, right? They don't want to do it. So it's not a matter of just convincing someone, here's some facts and here's why maybe you should think about it this way. You have to realize that for many people, this is a part of how they see themselves in the world. It's a part of their identity, how they derive meaning and purpose in their lives. And therefore, they're not going to just give that up just because you throw some facts out there, especially when they're told that it's misinformation, it's not really true.
It's misinformation, it's greenwashing.
Yeah. Right.
That's actually, our belief. The thing about the oil and gas industry is, everyone likes to get up on panels and bitch and cry about how the oil and gas industry's lost their narrative. And, the problem is that the oil and gas industry is a technical industry. It's full of scientists and engineers. And so very data-driven, scientifically driven community. And that's how they try communicating their story. And I'm like, hey, most people don't give a damn about data and facts. It's actually about storytelling and, bringing the human element back to a topic. And, I think someone like you take an environmentalist and you show them someone that deals with real energy poverty or something of that nature. We just had Jide on the show yesterday, who's from Nigeria, and just like hearing about, some of the distributed energy systems that they have around there. Just like, it's crazy what they have to do to just live and have a life like us. And start telling stories like that and people's eyes might open up. It's like, oh, it's not just about climate, but there's this entire other half of it about humans and society and human flourishing. And so, I think that's one thing that the oil and gas industry has really struggled to.
Corporate America knows this. This is what the whole advertising industry is built upon. Think about Nike, one of the most successful brands in the world. Does Nike pound you with facts about how many athletes use their products? No, they tell you a story about Tiger Woods or Serena Williams overcoming adversity, going on the hero's journey, suffering through all this years of practice.
They make you believe that you're Tiger Woods, right?
And then look, this has achieved excellence, right? That's the story. And people are aspiring to excellence. A lot of people are, or at least want to be around it.
For sure.
So that's a great example of just pounding people with facts is not going to change their mind. Of course, all arguments should be grounded in fact. And you should have all of the numbers and all the data ready at your disposal to back up your argument. But that shouldn't be how you lead off. It should be through storytelling, through emotion, through connection, and finding common ground in the forefront. Because if someone feels like you're adversarial coming at them, they're going to have their guard up. They're not going to be open or receptive to your ideas. And that's why I say it's really important to identify those goals up front, connect around those, say, are we in agreement that this is what we're trying to do, right? We want human flourishing. We want to protect the environment. And that's where we're aiming. And let's set aside all the technologies and all those policies and say, this is what we're trying to achieve. What is the most effective way to get there? Yeah. And I think that's oftentimes what we lose sight of in these policy debates and Twitter arguments and everything else. Twitter's hard because you're constrained on characters and people will...
There's not much nuance.
People will criticize me all the time and say, well, there's more to it than that. I was like, I have how many characters? What am I supposed to write a book in this tweet and give you every possible assumption and rationale behind it?
I think it's pretty funny. You like talk about like storytelling and there's this whole thing, there's this whole movement right now against natural gas stoves. And I think that this is only going to increase over the next decade or so. And, but behind that, there's a big portion of my friends on Twitter that think that the only reason that natural gas stoves are in houses is because of the effort of oil and gas companies and propaganda to say that natural gas is better for cooking. And I'm like, first off, you're giving the oil and gas industry way too much credit in their ability to deliver propaganda and storytell because we suck at that. Second thing is you look at the, it goes back, hey, was cooking off of a natural gas molecule better than cooking off of wood in your house? Like, yeah, cool. And we can deliver it straight to the house. And so, there's certain reasons why we gravitate to energy sources. And usually it's because it's a better technology. Like that's, for me, I'm a technologist. Like better technology wins, always. And so anyways, and there's also a huge disconnect. Like I remember one of my friends reaching out to me. He's like, hey, because, like climate advocates and environmentalists hate the API and just like can't stand, like the API is the representation of big bad oil and gas. And he reached out to me. He's like, hey, like how much like influence does API have in the oil and gas industry? I was like, dude, I've never like interfaced with API at all. Like no one gives a shit about the API. He's like, yeah, that's kind of the feeling that I was getting. Like this side hates the API, and oil and gas, it's just like, oh, they set some standards for us, but like they don't speak for us necessarily. So it's just funny to see the disconnects and misunderstandings across society as a whole, but in the energy industry in particular.
Robert Bryce, who has the Power Hungry podcast, et cetera, he wrote an article recently about this, showing that kind of the environmental organizations, if you tally up all the money they're spending on various misinformation campaigns around climate and energy, et cetera, and trying to vilify the oil and gas industry, it's $4.5 billion a year. $4.5 billion with a B.
Wow.
Right? Now, then he added up, well, how much is the oil and gas industry spending? They're outspending them. I forgot the exact number. It's something like 4 to 1. I mean, it's radically outspending them, right?
Yeah.
And you know, people can look up for the exact numbers, but it's not even comparable. So it's exactly the opposite of what most people think. They think, oh, this industry is trying to manipulate and mislead people and spending all this money to do it. And it's just the opposite.
It's back to what I was saying earlier. I was like, what do you mean all the capital flows going to renewables and climate?
Well, so that's a criticism I get a lot, which is people say, oh, you're just doing this to, shill for nuclear, shill for natural gas and make money. I was like, wait a minute. If I wanted to make money, I would have stayed where I was. I was a CEO of a company that was getting $60 million contracts. We had tons of traction. We were promoting all kinds of programs with renewable energy, energy efficiency. That's where all the money's going. I mean, you have to be willfully blind not to see that the government and corporations and all of the money is flowing there.
It's so funny.
If I was motivated by money, I would have stayed there.
I forget how much money was lost between 2016 and 2020.
Oil and gas guys, oil and gas guys are super capitalistic, right? And so I have friends that have gone into service businesses or tech companies that are based around renewables, and they're like, yeah, none of this shit makes sense, but it's where all the money's at. They understand like that's where the money's at. And so, if you want to go make money, like there's opportunities to go make money over there. And anyway, so, ending this podcast, I think it's important to note that you are working in the nuclear space. Nuclear is funny to me because if you ask people in oil and gas, there's two reactions. One is, of course, nuclear is the future. Like we understand energy density, nuclear is it. The second reaction is, hey, quit telling people that nuclear is the future. That's the only thing that can displace oil and gas. And so people realize that nuclear is the truth, whether they want to or not. But then you see all of this infighting on Twitter, like renewables hates oil and gas, and they also hate nuclear. And nuclear is kind of like this bastard child.
It's like, but if you truly believed in what your ethos was, wouldn't you embrace nuclear?
Yeah, right? For sure.
Unless you were totally religious about your favorite types.
Yeah. I mean, it's clean energy, right? And I know a lot of people like to attack the economics of it, but what's happening in the SMR space and then, potentially in the future in nuclear fusion, I mean, it's something to be really excited about. So just kind of, give us your take on nuclear and how it fits into all of this.
Well, I think the oil and gas industry and nuclear industry are very complementary. I mean, the reason I'm here in Houston right now is because I'm at the World Petrochemical Conference, and I'm representing a nuclear power company because we can help refineries and chemical companies radically reduce their emissions, right? We can produce heat up to 450 degree C heat for all kinds of industrial processes to break chemicals and bond, crack things, et cetera. We can give them 24/7 carbon-free energy in terms of the electricity side. So there's huge benefits to refining petrochemicals out the gate. So that's one thing. Then, nuclear power is not going to be competing with transportation fuels. I mean, of course, electric vehicles are going to continue to advance, but for all the reasons we talked about earlier, I don't see them becoming mass adoption in a widespread way that's going to displace. 97% of all transportation on planet Earth is through oil and gas today. I mean, it's the oil industry.
And even, I mean, you look at, like, when we talk about EVs, we're talking about consumer vehicles. But look, I have a CDL. I'm a truck driver. Like, replacing diesel in semi trucks with EVs, that's not anywhere close to happening. Tanker ships, I mean, things that are very industrial, earth movers. And so those, I don't even know if we'll ever be able to have the battery capacity and technology to actually power those things. But, when we talk about EVs, we talk about consumer vehicles, but that doesn't even touch airplanes, ships, heavy machinery. And so
there's a reason we don't have electric jets.
So I don't really see any competition with oil. I guess you could make an argument on natural gas. I see natural gas and nuclear as very complementary in terms of a power system. I think you probably could make an argument that if we really ramped up nuclear energy, that you would start cannibalizing some of those natural gas power plants. That's true. They would still play an important role because you're still going to have to adjust for peak. And although nuclear plants can load follow and they can ramp, they don't do it nearly as good as natural gas. And I think you want to have some diversity in your power system. So I think
that's extremely important. When we talk about pro energy, it's like, hey,
energy security.
Energy security and being diverse in your power system is extremely important, especially what you're seeing over the last year to 2 years with, Russian-Ukraine war and things of that nature. So that's another extremely important topic. So I think, sorry to interrupt you here, but on the point of like vehicles, another thing too is like petroleum is the feedstock for basically every product that's on the planet right now too. So it's not just a fuel for cars as well. It's like, hey, we still need it to, make everything in this room, make all of our plastics, all of our products. And so that's what I've always said too. I don't even see these things as competing with each other.
There's 4 basic ingredients for modern civilization. This is kind of Vaclav Smil, who's a famous author in the energy space. All 4 of them require fossil fuels and will for decades to come. So you have ammonia, which is central to fertilizer and feeding people. If we cut that off, basically half the world would starve to death, right? So that's a foundational piece. You have plastics, which, as you mentioned, everything in this room, from the microphones to our cars, our phones, everything is plastics are in everything, right? Then you have steel, which is the foundation of our buildings, our transportation infrastructure, how we construct about everything.
Try making wind turbines or nuclear plants without steel,
or
and
even
concrete,
like a scalpel. Try making a scalpel for your surgery. And then you have cement, which obviously our runways, our roads, our whole transportation network is required. Now, all 4 of these things require fossil fuels. And some people will comment and say, whoa, wait a minute. Technically, you can produce ammonia or plasma, or you can't do biopolymers and this and that. It's like maybe on a bench scale, pilot scale level,
commercially viable.
There's nothing that is anywhere close to commercially viable or scalable to meet the needs of global demand anytime in the near decades, much less few years. So no, fossil fuels are irreplaceable, at least for the foreseeable future. Maybe I'm confident we'll continue to march up the ladder of energy density and innovate and find new ways.
And I think we have to, regardless. It's a finite resource, right? So we better figure it out at some point. But that who knows when that point is. But I think that's important to understand is like all of these things that you mentioned are dependent on hydrocarbons. And I've always found it just odd that you can't be a fan of all of them to some degree. Like, hell yeah, man, I love nuclear energy. I think that it's fucking awesome. I also love oil and gas. Also love, XYZ. Like, I don't understand why that's kind of a controversial take to have, but
goes back to the religiosity we talked about.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm a huge fan and champion of oil, gas, nuclear power, geothermal, hydro. Not as big of a fan of wind and solar. I think they can have some limited niche application and it's fine.
I actually like I don't like commercial scale solar. I like solar on houses though a lot, or on parking garages, things of that nature. Like,
and
I think it's awesome. Like at my house that, hey, if I want to, I can build out solar with battery, and I can have a nat gas backup generator. And yeah, none of this probably makes sense in a spreadsheet, but it's cool that I have my own distributed energy system and throw some Bitcoin miners out there if I want. Like, I think that's cool as shit. So,
and you should have the freedom to do it.
Yeah.
Right. But the government shouldn't be cramming down policy on all of us, enforcing all of us to pay astronomical energy bills, or threaten the stability of our electrical grid and the viability of our economy. Because they are pushing one technology that doesn't scale.
Yeah. It's not a fair playing field.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I agree with that 100%. So, dude, I feel like we could probably talk for another hour if we really wanted to, but we're kind of getting long in tooth here. So this is all just very intriguing stuff. And I actually hope that, I was defending you the other day in some comments. I don't know if you saw this or not, but someone was like, is this kind of like malicious content production activity from Brian? And I was like, hey, look, no, I know Brian. I've talked to him before he started posting Twitter content. And I was like, he got a really good story of where he's come from, and he thinks objectively and pragmatic, and it's completely changed his worldview. And so I have a high level of respect for that, because I just don't think most people are capable of doing that. So one, thank you for that. Thank you for being a content creator and helping to teach the world about energy. And, thank you for coming down here and doing this show as well. It's awesome to meet in person.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate the opportunity to meet you guys in person, and for all the work you're doing to kind of spread this message out. I mean, we need as many people out there kind of championing this cause, and you guys created a company around this, right? And are doing a fantastic job of spreading the word. So thanks for your contributions in that area. And, that's what I'm trying to do. I mean, by day, I basically sell nuclear power, but, I'm in my spare time, basically, I try to write, tweet. I'm writing this little book right now, a short little book that I'll be publishing. But if people want to just track what I'm doing, they can just follow me on Twitter at Brian Gitt, or they can I have a personal website, briangitt.com, where I publish articles that I write about energy or investing or those types of topics. So
awesome.
That's
we'll send links to Twitter, to your website. That way people can reach out to you, follow you over there. Highly suggest it. Brian's just a cool dude that thinks about the world in a great way. So follow him for his content. And if you like this show, make sure to share it with a friend. Share it on Twitter, share it on LinkedIn, email it to him, text it to him, write him a handletter note, tell him to come check it out. I don't give a damn. Just share it with your friends. This is some really good stuff here, and a message that everyone needs to hear. So Brian, thanks again. We will catch you guys on next week's episode.